The scorching Texas sun beat down on Camp Pendleton as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos walked across the dusty training ground. Her combat boots kicked up small clouds of dirt with each determined step. The afternoon air shimmered with heat, and sweat beaded on her forehead beneath her regulation cap. She had been in the Marines for 8 years, working her way up through the ranks with pure grit and determination. Maria wasn't like the other female Marines on base. Standing at 5 feet 6 inches, she possessed a lean but powerful build that came from years of rigorous training. Her dark eyes held a fire that spoke of someone who had fought for every achievement in her military career. Growing up in a rough neighborhood in East Los Angeles, she learned early that respect wasn't given freely. It had to be earned, sometimes the hard way. The mess hall buzzed with the usual chatter of Marines finishing their lunch. Tables filled with soldiers in desert camouflage uniforms created a sea of tan and brown throughout the large facility. The smell of institutional food mixed with the underlying scent of military-issue soap and starched uniforms. Maria grabbed her tray and moved through the serving line, nodding to familiar faces as she collected her meal. At a corner table near the windows, a group of newer recruits sat together, their conversation growing louder as they spotted Maria approaching. Among them sat Private First Class Jake Morrison, a 22-year-old from rural Alabama who had joined the Marines 6 months earlier. His pale complexion still showed the soft edges of civilian life, though basic training had added some muscle to his previously lanky frame. Jake had been struggling with the reality that women held positions of authority in the military. His upbringing in a small conservative town had taught him that women belonged in certain roles, and combat leadership wasn't one of them. He watched Maria with a mixture of resentment and disbelief, unable to accept that she outranked him and commanded the respect of seasoned Marines. "Look at her walking around like she owns the place," Jake muttered to his companions, his voice carrying a bitter edge. "Back home, women knew their place. This whole thing is just political correctness gone crazy." His tablemates shifted uncomfortably. Most of them had quickly learned to respect Maria's competence and leadership abilities. She had proven herself countless times in training exercises, demonstrating tactical knowledge that exceeded many male Marines of her rank. Her physical fitness scores consistently ranked in the top 5% of all Marines on base. Maria settled at a nearby table with her own group of Marines, a mix of men and women who had served under her command in various capacities. The conversation flowed easily between topics ranging from upcoming training exercises to weekend plans. Her leadership style was firm but fair, and she had earned loyalty through her actions rather than her rank alone. Corporal Lisa Chen, a communications specialist who had served alongside Maria for 3 years, was recounting a story about a training mishap when Jake's voice rose again from the adjacent table. This time, his words were clearly directed toward Maria's group. "I don't care what anybody says," Jake announced loudly, ensuring his voice carried across the room. "A woman has no business ordering men around in combat. It goes against nature. Back where I come from, we understand the natural order of things." The mess hall gradually quieted as heads turned toward the source of the disruption. Maria continued eating, her expression unchanged, but those who knew her well could see the slight tightening around her eyes. She had faced this type of challenge before, and experience had taught her when to engage and when to let ignorance reveal itself. Jake interpreted her silence as weakness or perhaps fear. Emboldened by what he perceived as his advantage, he stood up and took a few steps closer to Maria's table. His chest puffed out with false bravado, and his voice took on a mocking tone. "Yeah, that's right," he continued, his words dripping with condescension. "Stay quiet like a good little soldier. Maybe you should be in the kitchen instead of pretending to be a warrior." The tension in the room became palpable. Other Marines began turning in their seats, some moving closer to witness what was clearly building toward a confrontation. Maria slowly placed her fork down and wiped her mouth with a napkin, her movements deliberate and controlled. She stood up gracefully, her posture straight and professional despite the obvious provocation. When she turned to face Jake, her dark eyes met his pale blue ones with unwavering intensity. The difference in their bearing was immediately apparent. Maria carried herself with the confidence of someone who had nothing to prove, while Jake's aggressive stance betrayed his insecurity. "Private Morrison," Maria said, her voice calm but carrying the unmistakable authority of her rank. "You seem to have something on your mind. Would you like to share it with everyone, or would you prefer to discuss this matter privately?" Jake's face reddened, partly from embarrassment at being called out, and partly from anger at what he saw as disrespect. In his mind, no woman should be addressing him in such a manner, regardless of military protocol. His hands clenched into fists at his sides as he struggled with his next move. "I don't take orders from women," he declared loudly, his voice echoing off the mess hall walls. "And I sure as hell don't need to explain myself to some girl playing dress-up in a Marine uniform." A collective intake of breath swept through the room. Even the newest recruits understood that Jake had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Disrespecting a superior officer was serious enough, but the blatantly sexist nature of his comments made the situation exponentially worse. Maria's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her stance. Years of training, both military and from her childhood on tough streets, had prepared her for moments like this. She knew that how she handled this confrontation would be remembered and discussed for months to come. Other female Marines on base would be watching to see if she could command respect, while male Marines would judge whether she deserved the authority she held. The mess hall had become completely silent except for the hum of the air conditioning system. Nearly 150 Marines sat motionless, their attention focused entirely on the unfolding drama. Some pulled out their phones, sensing that whatever happened next would be worth recording. Jake took another step forward, his aggressive posture becoming more pronounced. His military training warred with his personal prejudices, creating a dangerous combination of competence and stupidity. He had the physical skills of a Marine, but lacked the wisdom to know when he was walking into a trap of his own making. "You want to know what I think?" Jake continued, his voice rising with each word. "I think you've been coasting on political correctness and special treatment. I think when real combat comes, you'll fold like every other woman when things get tough." Maria remained perfectly still, allowing Jake to dig his hole deeper with each word. She had learned long ago that angry people often defeated themselves if given enough rope. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. The anticipation in the room grew thicker as Marines began placing silent bets on how this confrontation would end. Some expected Maria to report Jake to their commanding officer, while others wondered if she might respond with words of her own. Very few anticipated what was actually about to happen. Jake's frustration mounted as Maria continued to remain silent. In his limited worldview, her lack of response confirmed his belief that she was weak and unfit for leadership. He decided to escalate the situation to force her into a reaction that would prove his point. He raised his right hand and pointed his finger directly at Maria's face, leaning forward aggressively as he prepared to deliver what he imagined would be the final blow to her authority. His movement was quick, but telegraphed, the action of someone accustomed to intimidating others through physical presence rather than actual skill. What Jake didn't know was that Maria had been watching his body language from the moment he stood up. Years of martial arts training, combined with military combat instruction, had taught her to read the subtle signs that preceded violence. She had already calculated several different responses to various scenarios, waiting to see which one Jake would choose. The moment his hand moved toward her face, Maria's training took over. Her mind shifted into combat mode, and time seemed to slow down as adrenaline flooded her system. She could see exactly what Jake intended to do, and she was already 3 moves ahead of him in her mental calculation of how this confrontation would end. Jake's hand cut through the air toward Maria's face with surprising speed. His palm was open, fingers spread wide, aimed directly at her left cheek. The slap would have been hard enough to echo through the mess hall and leave a bright red mark on her face. In Jake's mind, this physical humiliation would finally put her in what he considered her proper place. But Maria had been expecting this exact move. The moment Jake's shoulders shifted and his weight transferred to his front foot, she knew what was coming. Her years of mixed martial arts training, learned initially as a teenager in Los Angeles to survive neighborhood dangers, had been refined and sharpened through military combat instruction. She possessed something Jake completely lacked, the ability to remain calm under pressure while executing precise, devastating techniques. As Jake's hand approached her face, Maria shifted her weight slightly to her right side while simultaneously raising her left forearm in a textbook defensive block. The movement was so smooth and natural that it appeared almost effortless, like she was simply brushing away an annoying insect rather than defending against an assault. Jake's palm struck Maria's forearm with a sharp slap that echoed through the silent mess hall. The sound was crisp and loud, but instead of the humiliating contact he had intended, Jake found his attack completely neutralized. His momentum carried him slightly forward, off balance and vulnerable. Maria didn't hesitate for even a fraction of a second. While Jake was still processing the fact that his attack had been blocked, she was already launching her counterattack. Her right hand shot forward in a lightning-fast strike, her knuckles extended in a precise spear hand technique aimed directly at Jake's solar plexus. The strike landed with surgical precision just below Jake's ribcage, driving deep into his diaphragm and causing him to double over involuntarily. All the air rushed out of his lungs in a sharp gasp, and his vision blurred as his body struggled to process the sudden shock. But Maria wasn't finished. As Jake began to fold forward from the body shot, Maria grabbed his extended right wrist with both of her hands. Her grip was iron strong from years of training, and Jake immediately realized he was in serious trouble. Before he could react or attempt to pull away, Maria executed a textbook wrist lock technique that she had practiced thousands of times. She stepped to his right side while maintaining her grip on his wrist, then rotated his arm in a smooth, controlled motion that put tremendous pressure on his wrist joint. The technique was called a standing kimura, and when applied correctly by someone with Maria's skill level, it was virtually impossible to escape. Jake's eyes widened in panic as he felt his wrist being twisted beyond its natural range of motion. The pain started as a sharp ache, but quickly escalated to an excruciating burn that shot up his entire arm. He tried to resist, to use his superior size and strength to break free, but Maria had positioned herself perfectly to use his own body weight against him. "Let go!" Jake gasped, his voice strained and desperate. "You're breaking my arm!" Maria's expression remained completely calm and professional, but her grip didn't loosen for even a moment. She had him in a position where any attempt to struggle would only increase the pressure on his already stressed joint. The technique was designed to control an opponent through pain compliance, and Maria was applying it with textbook precision. The entire confrontation had taken less than 5 seconds from start to finish. The 150 Marines watching the scene sat in stunned silence, many of them struggling to process what they had just witnessed. Jake Morrison, who had been loudly proclaiming his superiority over women just moments before, was now completely helpless and begging for mercy. Several Marines had their phones out and were recording the encounter, capturing every moment of Jake's humiliation for posterity. The video would later spread throughout the base and beyond, becoming a lesson in why respect should be earned through actions rather than demanded through prejudice. Sergeant First Class Williams, a veteran Marine with 20 years of service, watched the scene unfold with a mixture of admiration and concern. He had served alongside Maria in 2 different deployments and had never seen her lose control or use excessive force. But he also knew that the situation needed to be de-escalated before it went too far. "Santos," he called out quietly, his voice carrying the authority of experience. "I think Private Morrison has learned his lesson." Maria's eyes flicked briefly toward Williams, acknowledging his words, but she didn't immediately release her hold on Jake's wrist. She wanted to make sure the lesson was thoroughly learned, not just by Jake, but by every Marine in the room who might be harboring similar attitudes. Jake's face had turned pale, and sweat was beginning to bead on his forehead from the combination of pain and humiliation. His free hand was grasping at empty air, trying to find some way to relieve the pressure on his trapped arm. Every movement he made only emphasized how completely outclassed he had been. "Do you understand now, Private Morrison?" Maria asked, her voice still calm and professional despite the circumstances. "Do you understand why rank and respect aren't determined by gender?" Jake nodded frantically, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. "Yes, ma'am," he gasped out, the proper military courtesy coming naturally now that he understood the reality of his situation. "I understand." Maria held the position for another few seconds, ensuring that the lesson was burned into Jake's memory, then released his wrist with a smooth motion that left him stumbling backward. Jake immediately cradled his injured arm against his chest, his wrist already beginning to swell from the pressure that had been applied to it. The silence in the mess hall was deafening. Nobody moved or spoke as the reality of what had just happened settled over the room. Maria calmly straightened her uniform and picked up her tray, as if nothing unusual had occurred. "Corporal Chen," she said to her companion at the table, her voice returning to its normal conversational tone. "Were you finished telling us about that communication equipment malfunction?" Lisa Chen blinked in surprise, then quickly recovered her composure. "Yes, ma'am," she replied, following Maria's lead in treating the incident as a minor interruption rather than a major confrontation. Jake stood in the center of the mess hall, still holding his injured wrist, as the reality of his situation began to sink in. He had challenged a superior officer, been publicly humiliated, and was now facing potential disciplinary action that could end his military career before it had truly begun. The other Marines slowly began to resume their conversations, but the atmosphere in the room had changed completely. Word of the incident would spread throughout the base within hours, and Jake's reputation would be permanently damaged. More importantly, Maria's handling of the situation would become legendary, a story told to new recruits about the importance of respecting all Marines, regardless of gender. Dr. B. Patricia Hughes, a Navy physician who had been eating lunch at a nearby table, approached Jake with her medical bag. She had witnessed the entire confrontation and could see that his wrist was already showing signs of significant injury. "Private, I think you need to have that wrist examined," she said professionally. "It looks like you may have sustained some ligament damage." Jake nodded numbly, still trying to process how quickly his day had gone from bad to catastrophic. As Dr. Hughes led him toward the medical facility, he cast one final glance back at Maria, who was calmly eating her lunch as if nothing had happened. The incident had lasted less than 10 minutes from start to finish, but its effects would ripple through the base community for months to come. Video footage of the confrontation would be analyzed frame by frame, becoming a case study in both military discipline and combat effectiveness. For Maria, it was just another day in her military career, another challenge met and overcome through skill and professionalism. She had proven once again that respect was earned through competence, not granted through prejudice, and that underestimating someone based on gender could be a painful mistake. The base medical facility hummed with activity as Dr. Patricia Hughes carefully examined Jake Morrison's injured wrist. The X-ray machine's mechanical whir filled the small examination room while Jake sat on the edge of a hospital bed, his face a mixture of pain and embarrassment. His right wrist had swollen to nearly twice its normal size, and the discoloration was already beginning to show the angry purple and black bruises that would mark his humiliation for weeks to come. "Well, Private Morrison," Dr. Hughes said as she clipped the X-ray images to the light board, "you have a severely sprained wrist with possible ligament damage. The good news is that nothing appears to be broken, but you'll be in a cast for at least 6 weeks, followed by several months of physical therapy." Jake stared at the images of his injured joint, the white bones stark against the dark background of the film. The reality of his situation was finally beginning to sink in. Not only had he been completely outmatched and humiliated in front of 150 fellow Marines, but he was now facing a significant injury that would impact his training and career prospects. "Doctor," Jake said quietly, his voice hoarse from the earlier confrontation, "will this affect my ability to complete my military obligations?" Dr. Hughes looked at him with a mixture of professional compassion and barely concealed disappointment. As a Navy officer who had worked alongside Marines for 15 years, she had witnessed countless examples of both courage and stupidity. Jake's case clearly fell into the latter category. "That depends on several factors," she replied, while preparing the casting materials. "Your wrist will heal, but there may be some permanent stiffness that could affect your performance in combat situations. More importantly, Private, you're facing potential disciplinary action that could be far more damaging to your career than any physical injury." As Dr. Hughes worked on applying Jake's cast, word of the mess hall incident was spreading throughout Camp Pendleton like wildfire. Marines gathered in small groups, discussing what they had witnessed and sharing cell phone videos that captured every moment of the confrontation. The footage was crystal clear, showing Jake's aggressive approach, his attempted strike, and Maria's lightning-fast response that left him completely helpless. In the base commander's office, Colonel Michael Patterson sat behind his desk reviewing the preliminary incident report. Patterson was a career Marine with 25 years of service, and he had seen virtually every type of disciplinary problem that could occur on a military installation. However, the situation involving Jake Morrison and Staff Sergeant Santos presented some unique challenges. Major Jennifer Taylor, the base's legal officer, knocked on Patterson's door and entered with a thick folder containing witness statements and video evidence. Taylor was a sharp attorney who had transitioned from civilian law practice to military service, and she had quickly earned a reputation for thorough preparation and fair judgment. "Colonel," Taylor began as she settled into a chair across from Patterson's desk, "I've reviewed all the available evidence regarding the Morrison-Santos incident. We have multiple witness statements, several video recordings, and medical documentation of Morrison's injuries." Patterson leaned back in his chair, studying the preliminary reports spread across his desk. "What's your assessment, Major? How do we handle this situation fairly while maintaining discipline and order?" Taylor opened her folder and pulled out a legal pad covered with notes. From a purely legal standpoint, Private Morrison initiated the confrontation through verbal harassment, escalated to physical assault, and was subsequently subdued by Staff Sergeant Santos using appropriate defensive force. Morrison is clearly in violation of multiple military regulations. The colonel nodded thoughtfully. "And Santos? Any concerns about excessive force or improper conduct?" "None whatsoever," Taylor replied firmly. "Multiple witnesses confirm that Santos attempted to de-escalate the situation through verbal commands. She only used physical force after Morrison attempted to strike her, and she immediately ceased her defensive actions once Morrison was controlled. Her response was textbook military training." Meanwhile, in the Marines' quarters, Jake's bunkmates were packing his belongings while he remained in the medical facility. The atmosphere in the barracks was tense, with Marines divided between those who felt sympathy for Jake's injury and those who believed he had gotten exactly what he deserved. Private First Class David Chen, Lisa's younger brother who had arrived at the base just 2 months earlier, was among those helping to pack Jake's gear. David had grown up in San Francisco with strong values about equality and respect, and Jake's behavior had disgusted him from the beginning. "I don't understand how someone can be so stupid," David said to his roommate while folding Jake's uniforms. "Santos has more combat experience than half the men on this base. Morrison picked the worst possible person to mess with." His roommate, Private Marcus Johnson from Detroit, nodded in agreement. "My older sister serves in the Army, and she's faced the same kind of garbage from ignorant guys who think women can't fight. The difference is, Santos had the skills to back up her rank." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Gunnery Sergeant Robert Martinez, a tough veteran with deployment experience in both Iraq and Afghanistan. Martinez had served under Maria's command during their previous deployment, and he had personally witnessed her courage and competence in combat situations. "Listen up, Marines," Martinez announced to the room. "I know there's been a lot of talk about what happened today, and I want to set the record straight. Staff Sergeant Santos is one of the finest Marines I've ever had the privilege to serve alongside. She's saved lives, led successful missions, and earned every bit of the respect she commands." The room fell silent as Martinez continued his impromptu speech. His words carried the weight of someone who had seen actual combat and understood the difference between military posturing and genuine capability. "Private Morrison made a choice today," Martinez said, his voice growing more intense. "He chose to disrespect a superior officer, challenge military discipline, and assault a fellow Marine. The consequences of those choices are his responsibility alone." Back in the medical facility, Jake was finally alone with his thoughts as Dr. Hughes finished applying his cast. The stark white plaster encasing his wrist served as a constant reminder of his spectacular failure and poor judgment. He stared at the ceiling tiles, replaying the confrontation over and over in his mind, trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. A soft knock on the door interrupted his brooding. Chaplain William Rodriguez entered the room, carrying a small Bible and wearing the gentle expression that had comforted countless Marines during their darkest moments. Rodriguez was a former Marine himself who had transitioned to religious service after completing his military obligations. "Private Morrison," the chaplain said quietly, "I heard about your situation and thought you might appreciate some company." Jake looked at the chaplain with eyes that reflected a mixture of shame and confusion. "Chaplain, I really messed up today. I don't even know how to begin fixing this." Rodriguez pulled up a chair beside Jake's bed and sat down, his presence immediately creating a sense of calm in the sterile medical room. "Son, we all make mistakes. The measure of a person isn't in avoiding failure, but in how we respond when we fall short of our ideals." Over the next hour, Chaplain Rodriguez listened as Jake poured out his frustrations and fears. The young Marine talked about his upbringing in rural Alabama, his struggles to adapt to military life, and his difficulties accepting the changing role of women in modern society. "I was taught that men should protect women," Jake said, his voice breaking slightly. "I never learned how to respect a woman who could protect herself better than I could." The chaplain nodded with understanding. "Growth requires us to question our assumptions and expand our perspectives. Perhaps this experience, as painful as it is, can be the beginning of important personal growth for you." While Jake grappled with his situation in the medical facility, Maria was conducting her regular afternoon training session with a group of junior Marines. The training ground was filled with the sounds of combat practice, the sharp crack of simulated gunfire, the thud of boots on packed earth, and the shouted commands of instructors guiding their students through complex tactical exercises. Maria moved through the training area with fluid confidence, observing each Marine's performance and offering corrections when necessary. Her earlier confrontation with Jake hadn't affected her demeanor or professional focus in the slightest. She treated the incident as a minor interruption rather than a significant event. Corporal Lisa Chen approached Maria during a break in the training exercise. Lisa had been worried about her friend and mentor, concerned that the day's events might have been more emotionally challenging than Maria was letting on. "Sergeant Santos," Lisa said quietly, "are you doing okay after what happened today?" Maria looked at her with a slight smile that reflected both confidence and weary experience. "Corporal Chen, I've been dealing with men like Morrison since I was 16 years old. Today's incident was actually resolved more quickly and cleanly than most." The training session continued for another 2 hours, with Maria demonstrating the same patient instruction and tactical expertise that had earned her the respect of her peers. Her ability to compartmentalize the earlier confrontation and focus entirely on her professional responsibilities impressed even the most experienced Marines present. As the sun began to set over Camp Pendleton, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red, the final pieces of Jake Morrison's military career were falling into place. Colonel Patterson had reviewed all the evidence and made his decision regarding appropriate disciplinary action. The following morning, Jake would face a formal military tribunal where he would be charged with assault on a superior officer, conduct unbecoming a Marine, and violation of military equality policies. His military career would effectively end before it had truly begun, and he would be processed for discharge within 30 days. Maria Santos, meanwhile, would continue her distinguished service, eventually earning promotion to gunnery sergeant and going on to train hundreds of Marines in combat tactics and leadership principles. The incident with Jake Morrison would become part of base legend, a cautionary tale told to new recruits about the importance of respect and professionalism. Years later, Jake would look back on that day in the mess hall as the moment that changed his life forever. The humiliation and consequences of his actions would force him to examine his prejudices and assumptions, eventually leading to personal growth and a career in social work helping veterans adjust to civilian life. The story would be retold countless times throughout the Marine Corps, always with the same moral lesson: that true strength isn't determined by gender, size, or background, but by character, training, and the courage to stand up for what's right. Maria Santos had demonstrated all three qualities in the space of 10 seconds, earning a place in Marine Corps folklore that would outlast her entire career. The 150 Marines who witnessed that confrontation would never forget the sight of Staff Sergeant Maria Santos standing calmly in the mess hall, having just proven that respect must be earned through actions, not demanded through prejudice. Her lesson was taught with precision, delivered with authority, and remembered with lasting impact by everyone present that day.